Hello and welcome to session 5 of our Autism Spectrum Disorder After School Special. Thank you for joining us again. This session has been pre-recorded, so there will not be a Q&A session at the end, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. This session is part 2 of our sensory systems series. So if you have not watched the part 1, please pause, go back, get your background information on sensory systems, and then come on back for this slightly elevated knowledge around sensory systems. We do have Cassandra McNutt, our wonderful Chinook's Edge occupational therapist, joining us to guide us through our learning today. But before we start, I thought we'd just remind ourselves of exactly why we're here and what we do in Chinook's Edge with inclusive education. Once again, as is stated by our by Alberta Ed, these are the principles of inclusive education. So we anticipate, value, and support diversity and learner differences. We set high expectations for all learners. We understand learners' strengths and their needs. We remove barriers from learning environments. We build capacity and we collaborate for success. I feel like today, our main two that we're looking at are we're removing barriers within learning environments and we're building capacity within our staff and our students. Now, of course, in Chinook's Edge, we like to do things our own way. So we took those and we made them our own, and we decided on 5 vital actions for inclusion that we do in Chinook's Edge. So we build an inclusive mindset, we develop specialized knowledge and skills, we provide specialized students programming, and we use data-driven interventions and strategies, and we participate in collaborative processes. So, Cassie, if you could take it away from here and guide us through part 2 of the sensory systems.
Sure. Thanks, Janice. So this is just a visual that we used quite a bit in the last presentation, so I just wanted to bring it up again, looking at all of our different sensory systems. And before I get started, I just want to make a quick disclaimer that a lot of the things that I'm mentioning today are universal strategies. That being said, each student has their own sensory profile. So some of the things may work for them, some of the things may not work for them. So it's just really important to know the student that you're working with, and it's kind of a trial and error, getting to know them and getting to know their likes and dislikes. So let's get started. So the first point that I wanted to make was just talking about regulation. So as an occupational therapist, what I do a lot of the time has to do with sensory regulation. But there's other aspects that actually fit into regulation as well that we won't be as focused on today. So I just wanted to kind of piece that apart for us. So regulation is the ability to change our arousal levels to match both the environment and the activity. So a great example of that is us being regulated and ready for bed at night looks a lot different than us being regulated and ready for, say, a meeting. And it's the same with our kids, right? When they're regulated and ready for bed, that optimal level is a lot different than when they're in school and when they're learning. So I just want us to think about the fact that regulation and sensory regulation specifically can change depending on the environment, the activity, and it's all about actually being ready for that activity that we're looking at today. So the sensory regulation piece is strategies which use the senses to help with regulation. Along with that, there's other pieces such as emotional regulation, and then looking at co-regulation, the student and the adult, and then self-regulation, which is our ability to stay regulated without the help of others. So one quick point to make is that all of us need co-regulation at some point. Our younger students need it more because they're still learning those skills. But even as adults, we need Co-regulation, for example, when we're really upset and we need a hug, that's a perfect example of co-regulation. Somebody else is helping get us to that appropriate level of arousal. So on the next slide here, just a little bit of a breakdown, kind of what I just explained. We want to be in that optimal arousal level, but that can look different for different activities, different times of day, and we're trying to stay within that as much as possible using tools and strategies to help with our students' learning. So this is just a way to think about our students' sensory preferences. So we have a picture of Winnie the Pooh and his friends here. So there are different sensory preferences. So our students kind of naturally fall at different points on that graph of arousal. So we have seekers, which you can kind of think of like Tigger. So they're bouncing around, looking for all of that sensory input. Then we have avoiders. So those are the ones that are avoiding. They don't like the loud sounds. They're afraid of fire alarms, that sort of thing. So that would be Piglet. And then low registration, we can think of that one as Eeyore. So those are our students who are really low. They seem tired, sluggish, and they almost need to be brought up to get to that optimal level. So just a quick way to remember it as we're going through the different sensory preferences. All right, so now what we can do, like I said before, just a quick disclaimer that some of these will work for your students, some of them may not. Each kid has their preferences and we kind of just have to go from there. So some body-based supports. Movement, of course, is a really big one. We know that movement helps support regulation and participation in learning activities. So lots of brain breaks, some yoga, Cosmic Kids yoga is a really good one. And then under movement, we also have two specific sensory systems. So the vestibular and the proprioceptive, like we talked about last time. This is a fun way to remember. So vestibular with a V is often good for alerting, or proprioception, so like your strong muscles, is good for calming and organizing. So heavy work, like we talked about last time, falls under proprioception, and that's calming and organizing. So we'll talk about that one a little bit later. But first, vestibular. So vestibular alerting is anything that's out of our midline. So rolling, lots of fast-paced movement, jumping on the trampoline, spinning in circles, that sort of thing. So those type of movements are going to be more alerting for our students. So those are the Eeyores that need to be brought up to that level. There are some vestibular activities that can be calming as well. So that would be more like linear movement. So like a rocking chair back and forth typically is more calming because it's just that rhythmic back and forth movement. But most often vestibular is alerting. Some other body-based supports, deep breathing is a really good one. Some examples to help our students with that is like deep breathing, breathe your air out onto a mirror and they can see it kind of fog up. Blowing bubbles is a really good one. Thinking about smelling flowers as you deep breathe in and then blowing out a candle as you breathe out. All of those. Some other ones are deep touch pressure. So that's calming for students as well. So things like giving yourself a hug, pushing your hands together, pulling apart, that sort of thing. Sitting in a beanbag chair that kind of has some pressure on the sides. And then another one that's kind of a hot topic is weighted tools. So like the weighted lap pads, the weighted blankets, that sort of thing. So weighted tools do require additional guidance from an occupational therapist if they're not a universal weighted tool. So just a point on that, but I know a lot of people do talk about weighted tools, so I wanted to mention it. All right, so heavy work, I know we talked about it last week, and it's brought up all the time when we talk about sensory regulation because heavy work impacts the proprioceptive system, which leads to that calming and organizing of the rest of the sensory systems. So these can be done classroom-wide or more individually if needed. So some whole body activities. I love seeing when kids help take book bins back to the library, or they help with recycling. All of that pushing and pulling of the carts is getting that heavy work, and it's right in their schedule. Animal walks, bear walks, getting that input to their joints and muscles. Desk push-ups, chair push-ups, pushing against a wall. All of those are great heavy work activities. And then there's a few other actually. So with our mouth, we can get some heavy work. So chewing on crunchy, chewing on really chewy snacks like granola bars. Gum is another good one. And then like we talked about the deep breathing. When we're deep breathing or blowing, we're getting that input into our jaw as well. Another fun one is blowing through a straw. So playing a game with a straw and a cotton ball that you're trying to move throughout the classroom. Those are really great heavy work activities for the mouth. And then hands, you can be doing some heavy work with your hands while sitting and listening to instruction. So things like fidgets that have some resistance, stress balls, squeezing spray bottles, erasing the whiteboard. All of those are perfect examples of heavy work for the hands. And then just some more ideas. So like I showed, pushing hands together, pulling hands apart. Any input that they can give to themselves is the most helpful, I would say. Pushing up on a chair, so trying to hold their body weight up off of a chair, pushing against a wall. I like to say that they're trying to make the wall bigger or make the room bigger, getting them to push for 30 seconds, and then they can turn over and put their back against the wall and try and push that way. Passing a heavy ball to a friend, anything that's giving us that input, and as much as we can incorporate it into the daily schedule as possible. All right, so a question I always get about heavy work is like, how long should we be doing heavy work? How often should we be doing heavy work? And typically my answer is, it depends. And you kind of have to read the student and respond to what you're seeing from them. So this kind of goes back to that observing, having that relationship with them. If you're seeing that they're moving around quite a bit, they're looking like they need a movement break, you're reading that and you're seeing that they need something, that would be a perfect opportunity for a heavy work break. And also doing proactive breaks or proactive activities throughout their schedule. So like I mentioned, every day at 9:15, whether they need a break or not, they are the ones that are helping carry the library books back to the library. So it really just depends. But a good heavy work activity can last quite a while, but it really just depends on the student, depends on their threshold, where they are in that chart, if they need more or if they need less. So that brings us to our next slide. How many chicken wings can you eat? This is just a way to explain that some of us maybe can eat, 20 chicken wings. Some of us maybe can eat 5. So based on our level of arousal, how much we're needing, we could need a little bit, we could need a lot, and it really depends on the day too. So it's very important that we're observing the student, we know them well, and then we're kind of going from there. All right, so the next section is more sensory-based strategies. So a lot of this is changing the environments to then make more sensory-friendly spaces. So rather than trying to get the child to stop being sensitive to loud noises, we're going to adapt the environment so that they are able to be in that environment and learn. So some ideas for this, fidgets, alternative seating, so like I mentioned, the rocking chair, wiggle cushions, having spaces set up in classrooms for quiet breaks or just outside of the hallway when the student is needing just some quiet, low sensory input. The sensory room is a great strategy for that one. Different oral tools if they're needing more oral input, so things like jewelry if they're needing to chew. Ice is a good one for some students, gum, crunchy snacks, that sort of thing. Auditory tools, so things like headphones when it is really loud, warnings when you know that loud sounds will be coming. Another good one for auditory is quiet, calming music that kind of drowns out the rest of those, like kids hitting their pencil on the desk, those sorts of things. Yeah, so those are just some different sensory-based strategies. There's a few examples here, so like the leg bands on the chair, just a way for them to get some movement, some heavy work that way. Jewelry, these little things here in the corner, they're little animals, they actually vibrate. So they're giving a little bit more input for those students that are just looking for a little bit more. And then the next piece is just a little bit more about environments and those sensory-friendly spaces. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the light covers that just cover the bright fluorescent lights and makes classrooms a little bit more calm and inviting. Some other things to think about is reducing other visual clutter. So for those students who have a hard time when there's a lot of sensory input, making sure that the classroom or the area that they're needing to be focused on has less of that input. Otherwise, we're going to see them distracted by the rest of what's going on as opposed to what they actually need to be listening to. And then just some other things to consider when we're looking at the sensory pieces. So their sleep is a big one, how well they're eating, what their morning looked like as they were getting dressed, getting ready, that sort of thing. Any other stress in their environments, their vision, their hearing, and then just their age and their cognitive levels, really. So I would just say keep in mind all of these other pieces as well when you're considering that it may be sensory needs and sensory regulation needs. One big thing I always talk about is, like, we don't know what happened before the kid came to school. So if we're thinking back to the chicken wings and how much we can eat, what our threshold is, if a student had a really rough morning with sensory pieces, so they didn't want to wear a certain shirt and they had to put it on, they didn't want to brush their teeth, they didn't want to comb their hair, all of those pieces can fill their threshold up. And then when they're getting to school, they have very little tolerance for any other sensory input. So just keeping in mind that it depends on the day, it depends on the kid, but sensory needs are always changing, and we kind of just have to adapt with what our students are telling us. All right, and then just some important reminders as we finish up. So co-regulation and those relationships are so important because if we don't know the student and we can't figure out that sensory profile, then it's going to be really hard to implement some of the other strategies that will help them. And then helping them identify strategies that work well for them. It may not be the same thing for every student. So just really, it's kind of like a trial and error. I think of it like a puzzle. Everyone's sensory profile puzzle is a little bit different, and it sometimes takes time to kind of piece it all apart to figure out what is needed. And then just making sure that we're providing appropriate tools and safe spaces to use them. And if you're needing support, to reach out to someone who has some more information about sensory processing. And then just some of the references of where I've got my information. And then if you have questions, email Tanis. Yeah, I think that's it.
Oh, that was a lot of information there, Cassie. Thank you so much for sharing all of that knowledge with us. I think you tied in a lot of things that we have already talked about as well. So that's nice to see it all kind of melds together with that needing to ensure that the environment is ready for the student and sets the student up for success when they walk into a room, that it's not going to push them over their threshold just by walking in the door and seeing those really bright lights, right? That chicken wing example is quite funny. I know that if I have a big breakfast, I would only be able to eat 5 of them. If I haven't ate anything for a little while, maybe I can eat 10. So I think that's really important to recognize that, like you said, we just need to look at the student who is in front of us in that moment and assess what needs and what cues they're giving us right then, and provide the supports and strategies that will support them with co-regulation throughout the day. So thank you so much, Cassie, for that wonderful information. And thank you all for watching. And if you have any questions, as Cassie said, let me know. And I will probably point you in the direction of Cassie, or if I can answer them myself, I sure will do my best. So thank you for watching and have a great day.